Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Tales of Home, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I nudged the front door with my shoulder, balancing a crinkled paper sack against my ribs and a pair of slip-resistant shoes dangling from my fingers by their laces. The soles were tacky from a floor that never truly dries a film of fryer slick that clings like gossip. I had showered before clocking in, powdered my neck like my mother used to do before Sunday service, and still the smell found me hot oil pepper, a sweetness like burned cornmeal. It rode in on my clothes and hair, stubborn as a stain that argues with soap. Inside the living room, lamplight was the color of tea. Callie looked up from her phone just long enough to wrinkle her nose, then flicked her gaze back to whatever scroll had her thumb in a metronome trance. "Ma," she said, "that smell gets in everything." She didn't say hello. On the couch, Troy was draped like a thrown blanket shoes on the table controller, loose a race car on the television ping-ponging between railings with cheerful oblivion. The screen flashed a reset. He didn't. I shut the door quietly so the hinge wouldn't squeal its old complaint. The air had that mix they like microwave butter and the blue jar candle that promises ocean breeze but always gives me detergent. There was a bowl with a smear of orange cheese powder on the coffee table and a wet ring from a glass beating on the wood I used to rub with lemon oil until it woke up and shone. The bag rustled against my arm. A biscuit slid its warm weight, shifting like a living thing. I carried it to the kitchen counter, set it down, and waited for some perfunctory question about my night. There was none. Click, click from Troy's controller. Tap, tap from Callie's nail against glass. Far down the hallway, I could hear Daisy's white noise machine hiss like rain, and Finn's soft sleep cough that always made me want to pull a blanket higher even if he was already covered. This house had once been precise my house by deed and by habit. Rugs straight, shoes in the tray. A bowl of keys, not a drift of them in every room like spilled metal. I had paid for the front door frame twice once, when the original warped in summer heat, and again after a delivery driver clipped the porch with a dolly full of bottled water. I can still feel October in my wrists from the second job at the clinic laundry, how sheets snap when they come out of the press, how scald wants skin. All that to land here smelling of a kitchen that never sleeps. Asking myself if it matters to anyone that the mortgage is paid, because my nights were not. 8 years ago, count them, Callie called late and scared. She and Troy had lost their apartment. They were expecting again. "Just until we find our feet," she said, and my answer came like muscle memory. "Come home." I told myself the dining room would work for a few weeks. I unfolded the cot next to the window where the fig tree loves the light cleared a shelf, stacked their boxes neatly, and wrote our names on the calendar so appointments didn't collide. The first night, Callie cried for half an hour from exhaustion and relief. I smoothed her hair and made hush sounds like I used to when she was Finn's size. The weeks wrapped around us like elastic that never snaps, but never quite returns. The cot moved from the dining room to the corner because they wanted privacy. Then it moved to the spot where the dining table had been because their bed frame wouldn't fit any other way. I boxed my keepsakes, the quilt my late husband Eamon liked on winter Sundays, the tin with concert tickets, the little clock with a brass bird that pops its beak when the hour shifts, and slid them under my cot. I handed over my bedroom because Callie needed a door to close, because Troy said his back hurt, because we're a family. Ma and family in my mouth still means do the hard thing without counting. Electric, gas, water, my name on every bill. The city account for trash, the internet in a bundle I never wanted. They rearranged furniture the way people reorganize a life for a new job, sudden confident. A couch at an angle I had never considered appeared in the living room, like a stranger who somehow has my grandmother's hands. They painted one wall a color I can only call mint because seafoam on the can promised calm. They taped their surname on the mailbox in vinyl letters crooked as if ownership were a sticker you can buy if you can only peel the back off. On Sundays, I used to open every window and let the house breathe until the curtains bellied like white sails. I'd rub lemon oil into the wood and the whole place would take a breath with me. My radio, old, loud, reliable, would chatter and sing. When we boxed the radio, they said the static made the baby restless. The lemon oil migrated to the back of a closet behind holiday bins and Troy's fishing bucket that never smells like fish because he rarely goes. I learned to move quietly past the laundry baskets that never quite emptied past a jumble of shoes that multiplied when I wasn't looking past toy bins that birthed dolls I didn't buy, and neon plastic that makes civilized noise. When the cot sagged in the middle, I turned it. When turning didn't help, I folded an old blanket under my spine and told myself it was temporary as a haircut. By the time the store closed tonight, I had been on my feet 10 hours. We ran short-staffed and high drive-through volume. The headset pressed a crease in my hair above my left ear and my back hummed like a telephone pole. I still snuck a few biscuits into a bag after my final count, because Daisy likes them with honey and Finn likes to pull them into constellations of crumbs. I stepped into my kitchen. No, into the kitchen I bought, but do not own in practice, and stopped because there were two women I didn't know sitting at my small table. One had a tattoo that came up over her collarbone like ivy. The other had a laugh that wanted everyone to applaud it. Callie had invited neighbors. Troy held up a bottle with a wink in the glass and declared it Friday, baby, though it was Wednesday and my body knew it. "Where'd you crawl in from?" Callie said loud enough that both women turned to assess me. She smiled like she wanted me on her side of the joke, but the words made a small click inside me, like a latch that has been catching, almost closed for years, finally finding its slot. No one said I looked tired. No one stood to make space by the sink where I wanted to set my bag and rub my shoulders. Daisy and Finn were on the rug, cross-legged, their eyes sliding to me, and then away, not sure whether to mirror their mother's smirk or my silence. Troy's controller rattled a victory noise his race car hadn't earned. The candle burned Pacific mist. The kitchen smelled like beer and microwave meatballs. The old lemon ghost at the corner of my tongue tasted like a memory. I swallowed and it scraped like sand. Evening, I said to the room, because it was, and because I am not a person who announces injuries. I carried my sack to the counter and set the biscuits down. I walked past them down the hallway that had learned a new choreography of obstacles, plastic trucks like traps, a sock wilted mid-stride, a laundry basket with the mountain slump of a delayed fold. The bathroom door shut without complaint for once. I turned on the shower not because I was dirty, though I was, but because I needed noise that belonged to me. The water stung. I let it. I watched the steam fog the mirror and wrote my name with my finger in a childish loop in the place where my face should have been. I stood in the towel until the cold drew a border on my skin. In the dim of the hallway, I didn't change into night clothes. I pulled my small suitcase from under the cot, the one Eamon had teased me for keeping ready in case Paris calls. It rasped against the rug. I opened it on the cot and let the lid fall back, a quiet, decisive sound. I packed like I was answering a question I was finally allowed to hear. 2 uniforms folded in thirds, one still faintly smelling of the industrial dryer. The quilt with the square of green fabric Eamon spilled coffee on. I always hid that square at the foot of the bed as if the stain embarrassed the rest. My photo envelope thick with school pictures and that one of Callie squinting at the zoo. The blue folder with brittle corners that holds the deed and 8 years of receipts like a spine. The little brass bird clock. A copy of the Psalms that still opens on its own to the page Eamon thumbed when his chest first hurt, and he lied about it. I did not pack the lemon oil because I knew where it was, and the knowing would be enough until it wasn't. I did not pack the radio because it was stuffed behind a vacuum that doesn't suck and I didn't want to dig. When I zipped the suitcase, the teeth made a clean sound. In the living room, laughter rose and fell and the television laughed back at itself. I slipped my shoes on the ones with the gummy soles that grip even when your knees wobble, and I picked up my bag. I paused at the doorway long enough to look at the table where the 2 women were now taking a video with their faces ducked together. Callie was already watching herself in the phone screen canted towards the ceiling for that flattering angle. Troy burped. Finn yawned into his shoulder. Daisy traced circles on the rug with her finger as if she could draw a trap door. I opened the front door. No one turned. The hinge did not squeal because I had greased it last month with a sliver from the margin of the oil bottle I found behind holiday bins. The night outside smelled like cut grass and something wet and clean. I stood on my own porch and could feel the maple's leaves shift with the smallest wind a whisper higher than the television's laughter. 2 houses down, Mrs. Hart keeps a porch light the color of custard and a welcome mat that is tired but sincere. I walked there with my suitcase rollicking on one wheel because the other sticks. I knocked. She opened in her robe, took one look at me, my hair damp at the neck. The suitcase handle too tight in my hand, and stepped aside without commentary. Which is, I think, another word for mercy. On her couch the cushion sighed and then made room. The ceiling in her living room has that small crack that looks like a river on a map, a line heading toward a sea. I pulled the quilt to my shins and listened to the small noises a house makes when it isn't pretending to be something else. The refrigerator motor, like a breath in a sleeping person, the dog tags clink from her old beagle when he turns in a circle, the porch's soft timber creak. My body kept vibrating with the restaurant's line even though I was still. I watched the porch light sketch a square on the ceiling and understood something with the sort of clarity that arrives like a glass of water set in front of you just when you've forgotten you were thirsty. I could not go back the way I had come. I lay there and counted the lines on the ceiling until the square of light thinned with the hour. I could taste salt where my lip had cracked in the shower. On the rug, Mrs. Hart's beagle sighed in his sleep. The paper sack of biscuits rested on the coffee table, and I could smell them warmth and flour and a sweetness that is not lemon, not ocean, not performance. I pulled the top of the bag closed as if tucking in a child and let the house hold me up not as an intruder or a shadow, but as a woman whose name fits in her mouth. I slept. Mrs. Hart's kettle clicked off with a soft pop, like a door gently closing somewhere you can't see. Morning light pooled on her laminate floors, turning the worn places honey-colored. She poured 2 mugs without asking how I take it and slid one across the table. The cup warmed my palms as if it had been waiting to be held by these hands. "I can make up the spare room after my shift," she said, matter-of-fact as a grocery list. "Stay as long as you need." "Just a night or 2, I answered, because habit reaches the mouth faster than truth. I need to see someone." She nodded the kind of nod that doesn't pry. On her fridge, a magnet held the business card of a neighborhood legal clinic curling at one corner. Under it, a yellow sticky note read, "Ada Linwood Housing." The name steadied me the way a railing steadies a stair you've climbed 1,000 times and suddenly doubt. I rinsed my face in her sink, patted it dry with a towel that smelled faintly of lavender, then pulled on my uniform that had cooled on the back of a chair. My suitcase waited by the door square and obedient. I took the number 4 bus toward downtown with the cup heat still ghosting my palms. City's morning is a separate animal from night. The sidewalks exhale, the storefronts yawn, open, and everything wants to be first in line. I watched Jefferson Avenue slide past the bakery that serves cookies at breakfast, the barber shop, where the radio never quite hits a clear station, the courthouse dome sulking above the blocks like a cloud that forgot how to rain. My stop came with a lurch and a hiss. I stepped down, adjusted my grip on the suitcase handle, and stood for a second to let my balance find me. The legal clinic's door stuck at the bottom as if the building liked to test visitors. Inside smelled like paper warmed by sunlight. A woman with cropped silver hair leaned in the reception window. "Ms. Linwood has a 9:30, she said. "You're early." "I like early," I told her. "Then you'll like Ada." 9:30 arrived in a sensible navy blazer with a spiral notebook and a blue pen. She clicked only once. She offered me water I didn't take and a seat I did. When I finished telling her what I needed to tell my name on the deed, 8 years of just until bills in my folder last night's words, she didn't look startled or pitying. She made a neat stack of the papers I slid across the table. "You've been providing housing without a lease," she said. "Family, yes, but that's not a legal category that cancels the rest." She wrote as she spoke, her pen flicking precise blocks of letters. "We do this by paper. 30-day notice to terminate tenancy at will. Send it certified. Post 1 copy on the door with a witness. Keep the receipts. If they don't leave, we file for possession." The words didn't bruise. They arranged themselves like drawers that had never closed right now, gliding home. "I don't want to fight," I said. "It isn't," she answered. "It's a process." She pulled a template from a folder, typed in my name, the address I had scrubbed until it shone, and the date when things would need to be different. She slid the page toward me with a finger laid along the margin, as if to say, "Follow the line. Read it. If it looks right, sign." It looked painfully simple. It looked like air. When I stepped back onto the street, the cold made me exhale through my teeth. I turned into the post office because momentum carries better with an errand tucked inside it. The line bent like a polite snake toward the counter. I bought a P.O. box small enough to feel temporary and important enough to feel like a room with a lock. The clerk stamped the form with 2 quick strikes. The sound landed in my chest. My mail would stop sitting in a basket by a candle that never quite smelled like what it promised. From there, I walked to Metro Energy and Gas, the utility office that lives behind a wall of plants and a cheerful poster about conservation. A young man with a tie patterned like ripe limes helped me reset my password. He didn't ask why my hand shook when I scribbled a new one. River City Water took longer. Their online form wanted answers to questions I'd forgotten I'd ever answered the name of my first dog, my favorite teacher. I gave them and changed that password too. I moved on to the internet provider, which buried the reset link as if it were a prize in a carnival game. Every click was a small reclaiming, a latch clicking closed where a draft used to sneak in. By noon, my folder had a new stack receipt for the P.O. box printouts with confirmation numbers that looked like bad poetry the notice Ada had typed. I ate a sandwich at a park bench because my hands needed salt and warmth. A child chased pigeons with delighted futility. The birds lifted and landed in presence of gray. When I returned to Mrs. Hart's, the kettle clicked again. She set a plate of toast between us as if grief ate butter. "I know a thing or two about papers," she said, by way of nothing and everything. "You're welcome to borrow a roll of that blue tape that doesn't lift paint." "Thank you," I said, and we sat there, toast triangulated between us like a truce. That afternoon, we walked to my house together. My suitcase stayed behind. We carried only the envelope, the roll of blue tape, and a phone to take pictures. I could feel the house before I could see it, the particular hush a street holds when something is sideways inside one of its rectangles. The trash can lids gaped. Someone had left a bag half-tied. Gulls had found it and editorialized across the grass. Callie's car was gone. Troy's truck sprawled like a tired animal across the driveway. Through the front window, I could make out the edges of the couch angled wrong and the ghost of Pacific Mist. "You want me to knock?" Mrs. Hart asked. "No." My voice sounded like a snapped string fixed back into tune. "We're not asking for entry." I slid the certified letter into the slot, a careful push until it disappeared. Then I centered the notice on the front door, smoothed the paper with my palm, and ran a line of blue tape along each edge. The tape made a patient sound lifting off the roll like a small river pulled straight. Mrs. Hart stepped back and took a photo that framed the knob and the notice together as Ada had instructed. It was an ordinary rectangle of words. It made the whole door new. We had reached the sidewalk when my phone started ringing. Callie. I let it buzz itself, breathless. Then the messages began. The first, a voice memo in which my name was a stone in her mouth. The second, a text composed of long ropes of accusation. The third ping arrived from Troy's number, turning dark, where her words had gone hot, lawyers' rights threats built on wind. They fell into the phone's well and stayed there. I pressed the side button and laid the black screen face down in my pocket where it reddened my thigh like a hyphen. We stopped by the post office so I could send another copy certified as Ada had told me. The clerk stamped and slid and gave me a receipt. I tucked it into the blue folder. The folder felt heavier, as if paper could gain weight when believed. That evening, the calls climbed into the space where quiet wanted to sit. Mrs. Hart's beagle pricked his ears each time my phone buzzed, then sighed when I let it pass, a small choir of exhale after exhale. I did not answer on the bus to my shift. I did not answer on break by the back door, where the exhaust stirs a constant wind. I counted cash drawers, bagged chickens, smiled at tired faces, and each time the phone shivered, I thought of blue tape holding the notice smooth against my door. News does not travel by foot anymore. It sprints through wires and climbs into mouths. By the next day, Callie had posted a photo of the notice on her page, cropping the edges to make it look more severe, writing paragraphs beneath it that braided injury and performance. Friends with usernames I didn't recognize clucked approval. Cousins who hadn't set foot on my porch in a decade offered commentary. I read none of it. Mrs. Hart told me in the soft, clean language of weather, "There's some wind online." I nodded because wind exists and so do walls. On the third morning after we taped the notice, Mrs. Hart and I walked past the house again. Not because we needed to, but because my feet turned there the way roots turn toward water. The curtains were open, dishes stacked like a skyline in the sink. A spoon clung to the edge of a bowl as if waiting for a signal. We did not go inside. We stood on the porch and let the winter air press its cool hand to our faces. "Do you want to document conditions?" she asked, practical as tape. "Yes," I said, and raised my phone. I took pictures of the yard where a bicycle lay, like a fallen letter, of the trash lids open-mouthed of the mailbox with their sticker surname peeling at the corner. The photos felt like inventory taken before a storm. When we turned to leave, the front door cracked open. Daisy's face peered out, her hair doing its morning halo. She blinked against the light, then stepped fully into the doorway in her socks, holding something folded in both hands. "Grandma," she whispered as if the porch were a library. "I made this for you." She handed me a drawing of the house done in pencil first, then coppiced over in crayon, her careful lines making even the stoop look steady. 4 stick figures held hands on the steps, tall, medium, medium, small, each with a balloon head, 2 dots, and a smile. In the corner she had written Grandma with the N backwards, as if letters were a swing she hadn't learned the rhythm of yet. I crouched to meet her eyes. "Thank you," I said, because gratitude is a clean word, and because the drawing did not ask me to be something else. "Are you mad?" Her voice gathered itself around the word like a coat too big for a small frame. "I'm tired," I said, "and I need things to be put back where they go." She nodded solemnly as if I had explained gravity. "Can I visit?" "Ask your mom," I told her. "If she says yes, we'll make sure it's a good visit." Callie's voice lifted from inside the house, sharp-harried. Daisy slipped backward like a tide and pulled the door gently against its frame. I slid the drawing into the blue folder between the notice receipt and the utility confirmations. Paper, 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 and then a small constellation of color. After my next shift, I unlocked a narrow walk-up off Walnut, where the paint flaked in thumbnail moons and the stairwell smelled like old bread. The landlord, Ms. Cortez, a woman with keys bristling like a bouquet, had given me a week-to-week lease on her smallest unit. The bed creaked, the radiator hissed, the window sash stuck unless you talked to it like a mule, but the key turned in a lock that answered to me and me alone. I set my suitcase by the closet and my quilt at the foot of the bed and stacked my uniforms over the chair to dry. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the building learn my weight. I still went to the clinic laundry on Saturdays and the chicken shop most evenings. Fat spit is democratic. It pops the same at every shift. I packed my lunch in an old tin and marked my name in black marker on the lid, not because anyone would take it, but because it steadied me to see letters arranged in my favor. In the quiet hours before dawn, I spread my folder on the small table. Deed tax statements, receipts that knew my hands, the photo of the door, with the notice squared by blue tape, and added a page I had not planned to write. I titled it in big block letters, What I Have Paid. I listed the monthly sums for energy and gas going back as far as the online portal would let me dig. I listed water, internet, the school fees when Daisy went to the zoo and Finn needed a recorder for Music Week, the times Troy's truck insurance hit a snag, the groceries when prices grew sharp. The columns gave off their own light. Under the last line, I printed a sentence as clear as a stop sign. None of this was free. Mrs. Hart came with me when I returned to the house to tape that list to the refrigerator. We let ourselves into the kitchen while the TV laughed in the living room. No one looked up. I chose a spot at eye level, smoothed. The paper pressed a strip of blue across each corner, then stepped away and read it the way you read a plaque in a museum, silently, with the posture of a person who understands you cannot argue with bronze. Finn wandered in first, dragging a blanket that unspooled like a cloud. He traced the letters with a finger, not yet reading, but memorizing the shape of difference. Daisy followed her socks, sliding on the linoleum, her eyes searching. "Can I have a biscuit?" she asked, soft as breath. "On the counter," I said. "Honey's in the cupboard." She took one, split it with the edge of her thumb the way I do, dotted it with honey like a map, and ate with the concentration of a person who knows the exact size of a good thing. Callie stood in the doorway, phone in hand, jaw tight enough to ache. "You trying to humiliate us?" she said. "No," I answered. "I'm trying to see." Troy scoffed from the couch. "You can't just— It's taped," I said, not turning. "You're welcome to look at the numbers." I rinsed a glass that wasn't mine and set it upside down to dry, then stepped to the doorway where Daisy had perched with her biscuit honey bright at the corner of her mouth. I smoothed it away with my thumb. She leaned into my hand as if we had always been standing in that frame exactly like that. Back outside, the air neither hurt nor helped. It simply existed around me the way a coat does when you forget you're wearing it. Mrs. Hart and I walked the 3 blocks to her place without speaking. In her kitchen, she slid the blue tape back into the drawer and set a small notepad beside my folder. "Make a copy of the list," she said. "Keep one." I did, writing slower this time, each number a bead on a string. Each line a raft, the pen's weight honest in my fingers. That night, the calls changed key. Some came contrite, hiccuping with apology between the clenched teeth of accusation. Others wore costumes, friendlier numbers, pretending to be anyone but themselves. My phone wrestled on the table. I let it tire. I pressed my palm over it for a moment, feeling the vibration against the heel of my hand, a mechanical heart that belonged to everyone and no one. Near midnight, somebody, Callie, by her paragraph run, sent a text that ended just a couple hundred for groceries until we figure things out. My thumbs hovered. I typed, deleted, typed, paired, then sent a list of addresses and numbers. The food shelf on Barrett, the Job Resource Center on 9th, the utility assistance line that answers even on Fridays. I signed it with "Take care" because that phrase still lives inside my mouth and I won't evict it. The bus hummed the next morning like a hive thinking. I sat by the window with my folder across my lap, its corners softened by use. Outside, the city took its own inventory, delivery trucks, school crosswalks, the barbershop radio reaching for a station. My name sat on the papers with the square weight of something that fits. I traced the letters once, not superstitious, only awake. When I stepped onto the sidewalk by Jefferson, the wind funneled between the buildings and lifted the hair at my neck. I tightened my scarf and walked the blue tape in my bag, a thin river waiting to be drawn straight. By the 4th morning after the blue tape, the city wore its weekday face polite, hurried shoes clicking decisions into the sidewalk. I met Ada on the courthouse steps, my blue folder tucked against my ribs. She had a scarf tucked into her blazer, navy braid over sensible wool, and the same steady pen in her pocket. "You brought originals and copies?" she asked. Everything I said, and it wasn't bravado, it was inventory. Inside, the building tasted like old coffee and floor polish. The hall outside Division F was a shallow river of voices and paper. A clerk in a beige cardigan called names. People rearranged their faces into whatever they believed the moment needed. Ada took a seat with me on a wooden bench that had impressed backs for 100 small weights. I could feel my pulse in my fingers. I turned the blue folder so the tab faced the room, my name upright and legible. Across from us, a bulletin board listed tomorrow's docket with the certainty of a calendar that refuses to be surprised. "Stay with what you can prove," Ada said. If asked something you don't know, say you don't know. We're here for possession, not punishment. Callie and Troy arrived together late enough to look rushed and righteous. Her coat hung open, though the entry gust was still on her. His jaw moved as if chewing an argument. Callie's eyes skimmed me and slid away as if I were a window she didn't want to check her reflection in. Troy took out his phone and angled it low, thumbs busy with commentary that couldn't help him in this room. When the clerk opened the door and called the case, we stood. The courtroom looked like every courtroom you've ever seen, which is to say, it had the clean geometry of a room where words are weighed. The judge wore her hair drawn back and her attention like clear water. We sat where Ada pointed. "Mrs. Maddox," the judge said, reading from a screen in front of her. "You're petitioning for possession." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. Ada nodded almost imperceptibly, a metronome set to calm. The judge's questions were a string of beads. I moved along them one at a time. "Is there a written lease with the respondents?" "No, Your Honor." "Have they contributed to the property rent utilities maintenance?" "No, Your Honor." I lifted the folder's flap, slid out the first stack, and passed it to the clerk. The deed. The tax statements. Utility printouts speckled with confirmation numbers. The certified mail receipts. A photo of the notice squared on the door with blue tape hugging the corners. And behind that, because Ada had asked me to bring it, even if it wasn't required, copies of the list I had taped to the refrigerator. The pages looked like regular paper. They felt like ballast. Ada said, "We're proceeding under termination of a tenancy at will. Notice provided proper service established. We ask for judgment and possession." The judge turned to Callie and Troy. "Do you contest the petitioner's ownership or claim to possession?" Callie lifted her chin. "We've lived there for years. We're family. It's our home." She put her hand on Troy's knee and gripped as if anchoring herself. The judge's voice didn't harden. It didn't need to. "Family status does not create a property interest. Without a lease or contribution, you reside at the owner's permission." She glanced toward Ada, then back to me. "Mrs. Maddox, is it your desire that they vacate?" "Yes, Your Honor." Troy leaned forward. "We're going to get a lawyer. This is illegal." "Sir, the judge said you're entitled to counsel. Today is a possession hearing. The petitioner has provided the requisite documentation." "Judgment for the petitioner." Her words fell in a rhythm that made sense to the bones. 10 business days to vacate. If the property is not surrendered, the court will issue a writ for sheriff-assisted removal. Costs assessed as allowed. That's the order. Her gavel touched this block, a crisp sound, smaller than television makes it. Ada gathered our papers. I stood in the room, tilted, then righted. In the hallway, Callie swept past me without looking, Troy trailing with a glare rehearsed for an audience that didn't buy tickets. Ada put her hand to my elbow and steered me out of the path of a stroller. "Breathe," she said the way nurses do when blood pressure cuffs sigh open. "You'll get a copy of the order this afternoon. Save a digital and a print. Don't speak to them alone if you can help it. Call if anything turns strange." "It already was," I said, and she let a small agreement curve her mouth. Outside Jefferson Street cut the wind into manageable pieces. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps with the order in my hand and felt nothing grand, nothing cinematic, just a quiet untensing along the hinge of my jaw. I tucked the copy into the blue folder like a final page finding its ring. The 10 days arranged themselves into small, stubborn tasks. I worked my shifts, paid the walk-up rent on Walnut, kept the folder close and didn't answer when the numbers came up hidden. Mrs. Hart walked with me each evening around the block like we were measuring it for a new rug. On the 8th day, a neighbor texted me a photo of my front yard, a moving truck like a squat white punctuation mark parked crooked in the drive. The caption only said, "It's happening." I wrote back, "Thank you." Ada called, "Want me there?" I'd be grateful, I said, and meant it in the old way, the way my mother meant gratitude as recognition, not debt. We met on the sidewalk just after 8. The truck's gears grumbled like a person getting out of a low chair. The front door yawed wide. Callie moved fast, arms full phone, tucked to shoulder, voice pitched high. Troy managed one box at a time as if weight were an opinion. Their friends lifted and looked uncertain the way people do at a party that isn't one. I didn't step onto the lawn. I stood on the public side of the curb, hands in my pockets around my keys to keep them from making commentary. Ada had a clipboard. She didn't write, but the clipboard has its own authority. Finn navigated the yard like a tugboat dragging a blanket that gathered leaves. Daisy held a shoebox to her chest with both hands careful as a waiter. She kept her eyes on the lid as if looking at me would ruin some spell she wanted to protect. Callie brushed past a lamp, in one hand, the cord snaking along the steps. She didn't meet my gaze. She said to nobody in particular we were going to move anyway. The lamp wobbled. Troy muttered something about storage fees. A tall man from the truck crew asked Ada who to call if the lock stuck. "The owner," she said, tilting her head toward me. The words sat correctly in my ear without fanfare. There were small noises. The complaint of a bed frame against a door jamb. The thud of a box set down too hard. the dictionary murmur of tape ripping from a roll and slapped onto cardboard. The TV was on inside volume up, as if trying to drown out the fact of departure. A neighbor we waved to but didn't know by name slowed her walk and then kept going. At some point, scented air puffed from the open-door Pacific mist, trying as always to sell a coastline to a room far from water. It mixed with the cold and turned into nothing recognizable. I stood and watched the truck fill like a paragraph we weren't writing anymore. Daisy's shoebox slipped. It hit the grass lid first. Papers feathered out drawings I recognized and some I didn't. She froze. I stepped forward on instinct and crouched, my knees popping in a way I pretended not to hear. "May I asked?" She nodded, lower lip hooked between teeth. We collected the pictures together, houses with square windows and smoke drawn in organized curls, a dog with legs like licorice, 4 balloon-headed people on a porch. She held the box I slid the drawings in. "Thank you," she whispered, as if I'd fetched something from a high shelf. When she straightened, she stepped forward without deciding first and pressed her forehead into my coat. She was at that weight where children feel both feather and anchor. I put my hand on her hair. "Do we have to go?" she asked into the wool. "You have to go with your mom," I said. "You're welcome when respect is too." It was a sentence that arrived whole unadorned. She nodded and let go, practical as breath, and trotted toward the truck. Troy shouldered the last box into place and made a show of slamming the door loud, but the latch refused drama and only clapped once neat. Callie stood on the porch and looked past me at the street as if the house and I were something in the way of a view she deserved. She slid her keys into her pocket as if that meant something and walked down the steps without turning. The truck grumbled its way into the road. Their car followed, taillights winking like punctuation you don't need. The block absorbed the change in its usual manner. A dog barked twice and stopped. A mail carrier rolled by with the ease of someone who knows every hinge on the road. The maple in my yard showed the underside of its leaves and then let them settle. Ada checked her watch and then her face professional to the last inch. "You good?" she asked. "I am," I said. It landed without wobble. We waited a minute, not from fear, just from the habit of letting noise finish. Then we walked to the porch. I slid my key into the lock. It stuttered like a memory and then turned easy as it ever had. The door opened on its own time. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a photograph and finding it was a room. Dust had gathered on the windowsills in polite drifts. The kitchen carried the thin, sweet edge of milk gone shy. The lamp cord Callie had dragged earlier left a pale trail where it had skated across the step. I stood just inside and looked without tallying. Couch angled, wrong rug buckled where a box had sat, the lemon oil bottle still missing from its rightful place. Ada stood in the doorway as if she knew this part belonged to only one set of feet. "I'll email you the stamped order," she said, "and I'll be on my cell till 5. "Thank you," I answered. We shook hands with the sort of politeness that feels like a clean room. She left her card on the hall table and stepped back into the daylight, shoulders squared to the wind. I walked through the room slowly, not to admire or accuse, just to take the measure. The hallway, freed of laundry baskets, looked longer than it had any right to. The bathroom mirror held its cloudy oval like a pond that forgets and remembers, forgets and remembers. In the bedroom, my bedroom, the bed was still made with sheets I didn't choose. I touched the quilt I had kept in my suitcase and felt its weight without laying it down. Back in the kitchen, I opened a window. Cold air came in like a precise instrument. I set my blue folder on the table and placed my keys beside it. The keys sounded small against the wood like coins returned. I turned off the television. Silence rose from under the furniture and stood up. I poured a glass of water from the tap and drank it standing at the sink, the way you do when the cup is secondary to the act. The water tasted like metal in winter. I set the glass on the counter and watched the last bubble climb to its surface and give up. The house did not rush to become anything. It stood there, rooms, waiting corners revealed dust. Honest light moving its square across the floorboard by the door. I pressed my palm to the table I had once rubbed with lemon oil until it woke and shone. The wood felt cool and factual under my hand. I left my hand there until the temperature evened and the skin finally learned the room again. The locksmith came just after noon, a compact man with a canvas bag that clinked softly when he moved. He stood in the doorway reading the age of the hardware like a palm. "Good bones," he said, and the compliment made the jam seem to square its shoulders. He worked without chatter, pinned springs the tidy logic of a new cylinder, then handed me 2 keys on a ring. When I turned the first one, the lock accepted it with a smooth, unarguable click that traveled through the wood and into my wrist. I walked the perimeter of the rooms with the windows open. January air stitched through every doorway, lifting curtains, eddying dust motes into small constellations. I pulled the couch back to where it belongs, unsnapped the rug's small wave, and flattened it, lined the coffee table's legs with the grooves they'd worn in the floor. In the kitchen, I found the lemon oil bottle behind a bag of plastic eggs and a deflated beach ball. The cap had stuck and needed the persuasion of a rubber band. I shook the cloth out on the back step and then slowly worked oil into the table. The grain woke by degrees dark, and then darker light opening beneath my hand, the way a word reveals itself when you find its root. I carried a trash bag through the house and fed it the remainders: a cracked phone case, 2 bent forks, a clotted jar, candle that had failed to resemble ocean. In the bathroom, I wiped a ring from the sink and watched the clean lines settle like a horizon. In my bedroom, the true one, I put the quilt on the bed and tucked the coffee-stained square at the foot where it belongs. The clock with the brass bird went on the dresser. It opened its beak at the hour like a polite throat clearing. I set my blue folder in the top drawer and closed it gently as if drawers should remember the manners of quiet. In the late afternoon, I sat with my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up my bank account. The screen showed the old train of charges that had become weather meal kits, never fully eaten an extra streaming service whose logo I didn't recognize, a subscription to a game that promised jewels to nobody I knew. I canceled each one, noting the confirmation numbers in a new notebook with a red cover Mrs. Hart had pressed into my hands. Energy and gas ticked down as expected after I changed the password. The water bill would follow. When the page refreshed and the list shortened, space appeared the way a shelf appears after you return a borrowed thing. At dusk, I found the radio in the garage under a Christmas wreath and a bag of nails. It wore a skin of fine dust as if it had been sleeping in another century. I carried it into the living room and turned the dial with my thumbnail until a station came through piano first, then a woman's voice announcing the hour and the next song with a calm that steadied something in my throat. The sound set the house's bones humming in the low, kind way old wood does when it recognizes a frequency. The next morning, mail slipped into my new box at the post office. Thin envelopes with windows, one postcard from a company that wanted to buy the house, and a letter in tidy sloped handwriting on cream paper. I read it standing by the recycling bin. It was from my niece, Lena Ortiz, the second daughter of my sister, who keeps plants alive on her balcony without trying. Lena had her clinicals at the university hospital and needed a quiet place through spring boards. She did not dress the request like a favor. She listed what she could pay, what she would do trash on Mondays, groceries on Thursdays, if I liked a list, quiet hours for study, and a promise to ask before inviting anyone to sit at the table. If it's not right, she wrote, ignore this. If it is, I'll be grateful to sign whatever you put in front of me. I laid the letter on the table and left it there while I wiped the counters and swept the back step. After lunch, I typed up a one-page agreement, rent due, on the first shared chores in a neat grid: no overnight guests, without a conversation, no keys copied, no candles in bedrooms, and the line that pleases my heart more than any other, either of us may end this with, notice no drama required. I printed 2 copies and set a pen between them like a bridge. Lena arrived that evening with 2 suitcases, a crate of textbooks, and a bag of oranges she placed on the counter as if arriving somewhere always required fruit. Her shoes came off at the door without prompting. She stood just inside the threshold and looked at the room the way people look at an old photograph and try to place the year. It smells like my grandmother's house, she said. Not exactly the same, but close. She read the agreement carefully and nodded in the right places, asked whether Wednesdays were good for vacuuming, then signed her name without theatricality. Her signature ran clean and rightward like a river that already knows the shape of the valley. We settled into a rhythm that did not need announcing. She studied hard and well her notes layered with neon flags that looked festive but were efficient. Twice a week she cooked, once a pot of beans with bay leaves and a smoked bone that scented the house so completely I dreamed of Spanish words I don't speak, and once a lemon chicken that made the oil bottle feel that it had joined a choir. She left notes in a small hand on the refrigerator. Took bins to curb. Bought milk. Exam Thursday. Quiet late. When she laughed on the phone with her sister, it carried down the hall soft as a scarf, not the kind of laughter that steals oxygen from other people's rooms. Callie texted once more, a tight paragraph ending with a line about groceries only just until set, like a spoon on the rim of the bowl. I typed the addresses again. Food shelf on Barrett. The job office on 9th. The assistance program that answers every workday, and added the number for the church pantry that doesn't ask questions. I signed it. Take care. The phone showed that she read it and did not answer. The absence arrived like weather you dress for without looking at the forecast. On Sunday, I opened the windows, let the clear cold come through, and polished the furniture with lemon oil until the smell reached each room in turn and made them nod. Lena came up from the basement with clean towels and set them in the linen cupboard folded in thirds, the way my hands taught cloth to behave. She paused in the doorway, watched the grain become itself, and said, "There it is." I didn't ask what she meant. The floorboards already knew. After dinner, we carried 2 chairs to the porch and sat under the maple. The tree kept its winter silence like a monk barked silver where the lamp found it. I held my keyring in my palm without thinking and felt the weight arrange itself. Across the street, a boy practiced free throws at the portable hoop his mother wheels to the curb every warm day. The ball thumped a dependable rhythm and skimmed the rim with its rubber hymn before it fell through. Somewhere down the block, somebody's radio agreed with mine and answered with a chorus nearly in time. Later, alone in the kitchen, I went through the last drawer where odds and ends nest, the way tide lines do twist ties, a broken tape measure menus for restaurants that have gone out of business, a postcard worth keeping because its water looked like a promise it could keep. I made 2 piles trash keep and did not need a third. The drawer closed flush for the first time in years. I opened it again just to see the straight line and closed it satisfied. The small things declare themselves when the big thing is finally named. The next week, the utility statement arrived. The numbers had settled back to their rightful snow. On the bank page, the tidy march of familiar transactions sat in a row like chairs returned to a table. My name looked ordinary beside them, which is to say it looked true. I pressed my finger to the screen, not to claim, but to confirm the way you touch a sleeping child's back simply to feel its quiet lift. Toward evening, I turned the radio low and brewed tea. Steam curled above the cup, and the lemon in the oil and the lemon in the peel recognized each other and made a new, modest brightness. I carried the mug to the table and sat. The house breathed in its square ways, a gentle click as the radiator shrugged the distant hush of a car passing outside, the soft knock of a branch, reacquainting itself with the window. Lena came in, set a plastic bag of oranges on the counter, and lifted a hand in greeting before disappearing down the hall with the practiced quiet of someone who understands that rooms are agreements. I finished my tea and washed the cup. I turned off the radio and listened to the silence step forward from its corners. On the hall table, my keys lay next to a small bowl of loose change and the locksmith's business card. I lifted the ring and let it rest in my palm. Metal touched skin cool definite. The names on those keys matched the names on the papers in the top drawer. The papers matched the name in my mouth. I walked to the door and opened it. The porch light slipped onto the steps and pooled on the walk. Across the yard, the maple lifted one limb at a time in a wind I could not feel from where I stood. I leaned my shoulder to the frame, breathed, and closed the door. The latch answered once neat, and the house finally knew me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.